No! You can't do this to me! This is inhumane! Yeah, boy!
Have you ever gotten to that point in your life where you just had to go back to a certain old console for nostalgic reasons? Well, that happened to me. After a power outage in my area, my Nintendo Switch dock was broken. It could still charge my Nintendo Switch, but it didn't want to output any display, so I decided to whip out my PlayStation 3. Because my wife was busy watching Netflix on the PlayStation 4. Until I realized that the PlayStation 3 controllers decided to develop a mind of their own and lost control.
Or you know, something like that.
The first controller wouldn't turn on at all. It would show signs of charging when plugged in, but it would not connect to the console or switch on even after charging for hours. The second controller turned on after charging for a while, but went completely crazy jumping around the menu and selecting things I didn't want it to. The third controller seemed fine at first, until I pressed the D-pad and it decided to also lose its mind. So today I'm going to open up, clean, and try and fix these 3 remotes, each of them dirtier than the one next to it. To start off, you need to gently massage the controller to help it relax and gain its trust. Then you can flip it over and open it up by loosening the 5 screws on the back.
In order to remove these screws, we're using a Phillips head screwdriver. Next, we're going to use a prying tool to open up the remote.
Gently force the controller open.
Be careful not to pull too hard to damage anything. You're going to need to take the bottom cover over the triggers. And there we've got the bottom cover off.
After opening the controller, you need to remove the battery by grabbing onto the white plastic connection with some tweezers. By no means should you grab onto the cable's end.
Just pull it out. Next, there's one more screw inside that we're just gonna loosen.
For this, you're going to need to loosen the screw all the way, as loosening it halfway won't work.
Remember to keep your screws safe in one spot and not to lose them.
The controller's motherboard is now loose, only being held back by the wires of the vibrators.
They've got little clamps that's holding them in, although this remote version doesn't have the clamps.
You need to remove the white plastic from the controller's front cover. If your controller doesn't have the clamps, you can just pull the white plastic out. But if your controller has the clamps, you need to struggle by trying to pull the black plastic clamps back without breaking them, until you realize that you are actually supposed to push the softer white plastic away from the black clamps. Once all 4 of the clamps have been released, you should be able to pull the white plastic away from the front cover.
Next, we're just going to remove all the buttons. I'm going to grab the... Next, I'm going to remove the joysticks.
They should be able to be pulled off the controller without a problem, as they usually do not get emotionally attached to the rest of the controller.
And put the internals safely away.
I'm going to remove the spongy pads in order to... oh wow, that feels nice. Now that everything has been taken apart, you can see how the dirt, sweat and dust has built up over the years from multiple virgin hands touching the controller. Due to the condition of the virgin hands touching it, the thumbsticks have gotten sticky over time.
And then we're gonna wash it. I'm gonna be using some dish soap and a toothbrush to try and get these things clean.
Since I know that you've had a long, hard and girth-filled day, I've decided to compile 2 minutes of me cleaning the PlayStation 2 remotes for you to watch, relax and reflect on everything you've done wrong. Once all the parts have been cleaned, you need to let them dry out and sober up before putting everything back together, as water and electronics don't seem to particularly like each other since Y2K. People have added fire to this feud by trying to separate the two using waterproofing techniques, but this is basically just a mask to keep up appearances and pretend that they get along.
Now that everything has dried out, we can find out if we know how to put it back together.
With all the parts dry and sorted out, it is time to find out if you can leave a like on this video and possibly subscribe if you're not already subscribed.
During the disassembly part of this video, we figured out that we have two different remotes. One remote uses a little plastic thingy, and the other remotes have it built in. So, let's see how this goes.
And goes this does. I start off by putting all the buttons back in place. Luckily for me, the buttons are designed to only fit into a specific space in a specific way, in order to keep the button straight and prevent me from putting the square button into the circle button slot. After realizing my mistake, I put the square button into the right slot and continue with my life by putting the rest of the buttons and rubber pads into place. A trick that I learned is to actually only put the L1 and R1 buttons back after you've put the motherboard back in. If your controller's D-pad has a pin at the bottom, you can just put it back in and move on. But if yours has this weird plastic thingy with 3 arms, you need to struggle to figure out where it goes for a couple of minutes, until you decide to Google it.
Okay, so this little piece of plastic goes in at this angle. And then this goes on top. So before we put everything back together, I quickly want to try and educate you on some of the parts of the remote. These are the vibrators connected to the motherboard through these wires. Over here you have the power socket, and this is the reset button and the chip. Through my experience, the chip is not edible. Over here you plug in the power source, and this side you've got the two joysticks, and this is one of the thingies, and another thingy, and two more thingies over here. This is a strange metal thingy, and a bigger strange metal thingy. Not quite sure what this is, but it's part of the remote. Over here you can see, here's the connectors that the piece of plastic connects to. Now that you're educated and know everything, we can go on.
Now that all the buttons are put back into place, I use a soft dry toothbrush to remove the excess hairs and dust from the joysticks and the motherboard. But I do this slightly off camera to be able to keep my secret ancient cleaning techniques safe. I then put the thumbsticks back, although they seem to display no emotion during the process. Next, I put the plastic frame and motherboard into place, making sure that it clicks back into the clamps, and then get the screw ready to tighten it all up. But first, here's how you actually fix your controller. When you lift up the motherboard, you will see this piece of plastic with a connection. Those connections need to touch the motherboard in order to allow button pushers to do something. When lifting up the plastic, you will find a black sponge. This is not to be used to clean yourself, but instead to help plastic connections push against the motherboard. With time, the sponge will lose its strength, and by adding a thin piece of cardboard, it can help push the connection back properly. Be careful not to add too much thickness like I do in this video, as your controller won't be able to close up properly. A small piece of cardboard should be able to do the trick. Make sure everything is properly back in place before attempting to close up the controller. Now that we have completely 100% fixed all our problems, it is time to put the famous screw back into place. This time, tightening it halfway could work, but it is recommended to tighten it all the way. Struggle with the back buttons until you remove the L1 and R1 buttons to get the triggers into place. Once everything fits correctly, you can put back the L1 and R buttons using excessive force. Now to put back the battery. Some batteries have a mount molded onto them, and others will require you to have two white plastic frames to hold the battery in place. These pieces of plastic can only fit in one way, so it is easy enough to figure out. Plug the battery back in and put it into place before carefully putting on the back cover. Make sure the back cover fits tightly before putting back the 5 screws that hold the controller together. And there you have it. Now you have achieved something today. At this point in the video, you are allowed to pause and go tell a friend or family member.
Now that we've reassembled the remotes, let's see if they work. First I'm going to try the remote that was broken. Let's see if anything helped.
After long and intensive testing, I came to the conclusion that the first remote was still broken. I tried to open it up and clean the contacts more, and even change the battery, but nothing I did managed to get it back to life.
So let's see if we were able to fix these two controllers we tried to repair today.
Testing the first controller, everything seemed to be fine. There were no longer problems with the controller pressing buttons on its own, and I could get back to my gaming. Success. Testing the second controller of the controllers that I tried to fix, everything seemed to be working fine. There were no longer random button presses, and I could get back to a game, until I realized the circle button didn't work. I opened up the remote and cleaned the contacts even more. I even put in a double pad, as you can see in the video, to try and put more pressure on it, but nothing seemed to work. Everything worked perfectly except the circle button.
So in conclusion, were we able to fix the two PlayStation 3 remotes we attempted to fix? Yes. However, it is debatable. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful life.